Schreiber. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the time has arrived for Inside Boxing Weekly. So here are your hosts, Mike Goodpaster, John Einreinhofer, and Jeremiah Preisser on the Grueling Truth Sports Network.
Welcome, everybody, to Inside Boxing Weekly on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Inside Boxing Weekly is brought to you by the Retired Boxers Foundation. If you want to find out more about the Retired Boxers Foundation, you can go to Facebook. Just type in Retired Boxers Foundation. It's run by Alex Ramos and Jackie Richardson. They do a great job with it, so make sure you go check them out. I am your host for Inside Boxing Weekly, Mike Goodpaster, and right now I want to welcome in my co-host for this Titanic night before a great pay-per-view event, Jeremiah Preisser. How you doing, Jeremiah? Jeremiah?
I am doing really well. I'm always excited to talk boxing with you guys, so let's get it going.
All right. That was creepy the way that happened there. And next up, we got a man who loves pay-per-view fights, John Einreinhofer. How you doing, John?
Mike, I can't top Jeremiah's dramatic entrance tonight.
I know. It was like a dramatic pause. I was waiting for some music to play, maybe some Red Hot Chili Peppers, but it didn't. All right, let's go ahead. Before we get to the Triple G card this coming Saturday night, we're going to talk about a couple fights that happened this past week, both really good fights. One was surprising to me. Prince Charles Martin loses to Konatsky. John, I'll tell you, I mean, my opinion of Martin went up because I think he showed that he was tougher than what any of us thought he was. And with Konatsky, if you have that much trouble with Martin, how good could you possibly be?
Yeah, I thought it was a great fight, Mike, and I actually am pleased to hear what you thought about Martin because I was wondering a little on your take about it, and we've all got to adjust, and I'm with you. I had to adjust with Prince Charles Martin. You know, and maybe it was just that the guy wanted redemption, but, you know, when a guy fights that hard, he didn't fold. He could have folded a lot of times, and he didn't. And, you know, he sort of outlasted Konatsky in the sense that, you know, he came on in the last few rounds of the fight, and the 12th round was a crazy brawl because Konatsky did crank it back up. And I agree. You know, I still kind of like Konatsky, but what that showed was a little bit what we've talked about with Jarrell Miller, was that when Prince Charles Martin wouldn't go away from Konatsky's pressure in the first 5-6 rounds and came back strong, then you see Konatsky at 263 and a half. He's not putting the same pressure on in the second half of the fight, and a guy who relies on that like he does and Jarrell Miller does, that can't happen for guys like that. You know, to Konatsky's credit, he still gritted it out in the 12th round, and it was a wild finish. But to fight with his style against guys even better than Prince Charles Martin, he'll probably have to be in a little bit better shape. I'm not going to write him off, but I think he'll have to be in a little bit better shape. And I think Prince Charles Martin, at the very least, made himself relevant again. And I think indirectly he reflected positively on Anthony Joshua because Joshua handled him so easily. So I think Joshua was an indirect winner there. Martin was a winner, and I don't think Konatsky hurts himself, but he'll probably have to be in better shape the next time out.
All right, Jeremiah.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with John's assessment. I mean, you know, there's not much that...
You there, Jeremiah? Jeremiah? All right, so this is my problem. You said you haven't given up on Konatsky yet, but do you think he's really a legitimate contender to a heavyweight championship, John?
Yeah, I can't argue that, Mike. You know, I like him, but I know that's what a lot of people are taking from, and I can't argue with that he maybe when I say he didn't hurt himself, maybe I've got to rethink that a little, that in the way you're putting it, he left some doubts there that there would have been doubts already, but maybe there were more doubts about, you know, can he advance I mean, the heavyweight division's gone back and forth a little in recent years when we thought it's coming on, then it wasn't. Now I kind of think it is again, and that's why I'm saying that when we're talking about Konatsky, because it might be tougher for him to break through. But he's gonna have to be in shape to put that pressure on for a full 10 or 12 rounds, and he was still there tough in the 12th, but he did slack off a little, and Martin came back strong and was hitting with some bombs. So against people that are more experienced and better than Prince Charles Martin, because Prince Charles Martin, as we know, he didn't have an amateur career. So, against somebody who's got some amateur pedigree, that could be a problem for Konatsky. I mean, what I'd like to see is, how about PBC's got the Fox deal? It's a great deal. It's good for boxing. How about Brazil and Konatsky on Fox? I think that'd be a good Saturday night.
I'd take Charles Martin against Jarrell Miller right now, just to see what the comparison is between him and Konatsky.
No, that wouldn't be a bad fight either. But with Jarrell Miller, is he going to fight on DAZN? He's got that deal with Hearn. That's why I just don't know how that would necessarily play out. But I could see, Charles Martin in against Brazil or Konatsky against Brazil. I think those would be good brawls. Charles Martin was supposed to fight Dominic Brazil before then he got the IBF alphabet title shot against Glasgow for the vacant belt. That I know that the PBC did have Martin and Brazil set up, so that matchup has at least been on their radar screen in the past. But I think some combination of those three PBC can easily put together, and that would be good. And, of course, PBC down less experienced guys. They've got a Jagba. They just signed Joe Joyce. So, they're going to have the dates available for these guys and the exposure. So, there could be some interesting stuff brewing with what PBC can start to do with heavyweights.
All right. I guess we lost Jeremiah. I'm trying to get him back on, but it's not working so far. And this is not the night to leave me and you together by ourselves.
Well, I always will have plenty of words to cover it.
All right. Let's move on. Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, another good fight. I thought the decision was fair here. What do you think, John?
It's one of those ones. I personally did think Garcia did enough to win the fight. Not one of these ones that I've got an argument with or a big problem. I just thought Garcia, Sean Porter did throw more punches. There's no doubt about that. His strategy surprised me when he was doing it from the outside more. He didn't want to wrestle as much. I questioned it the first few rounds. I do think that was pretty effective for him, because I think what it did was he's more active than Danny Garcia, and instead of smothering himself and maybe losing out on a little bit of his volume by wrestling, he was just moving his hands a lot, and that was reasonably effective. But what I was seeing was just, I thought Danny Garcia, at least slightly, except for the 11th round, which I think he gave away, and if he had enough left in him, he shouldn't have. He was landing the better shots. He was landing the more effective punches. I thought it was close, but it was enough for him. But it's not one of those ones that I have a big gripe with it or argument. I've always liked Sean Porter. I like what he does in there. I like the effort he makes. So no big argument. Personally, though, I did think Garcia's more effective shots were enough to pull it out. But the judges didn't agree.
Well, neither do I. But you've been wrong on most of the fights you scored lately. I'm just teasing. Let's go ahead and let's look at this weekend's pay-per-view, which, it's not a Don King card from the 90s, but this is actually a pretty good pay-per-view, even though they're fleecing us on the $84, John.
Yeah, I agree. I actually agree with you there, Mike, and I think you summed it up well. That's the way I look at this, too. For 2018, I like this card, but I don't like it for $84. And even though it's hearkening back, it's just the reality of things. Don King did have a good history in most of his pay-per-view days, not all of them. In the later part of the 90s, he finally slacked off. But, before that, he always, when he went pay-per-view, the cards were really good. He put just packed, not for what they call stacked nowadays, which isn't stacked. It just means there's people, they see a few names they know on there and they say it's quote-unquote stacked. I mean, Don King was giving you a night of good fights in addition to the main event, did that for years and years. You know, this is closer to that, but it's not on that level. I was reminded of that when I was looking at the, you know, record of, Roman Gonzalez's opponent, Fuentes, who's lost 3 of his last 4. I mean, that's not the kind of thing you were getting on an old Don King pay-per-view undercard. And $84 is a very steep price tag. But the good part about it is there is no doubt this undercard is better than what we've usually been getting for years on pay-per-view. So it's an increase, but the price tag is, it's not, I agree with you. You really look at it, it's not much better, but it is somewhat better, but it's being offset by I think they went too steep on the price tag. I do think, you know, as good as the main event is, I think it's going to be hurt a little bit.
All right, real quick, before we go ahead and talk about the 4 fights on that card, we're going to take a quick station break, and we are going to try to see if we can get our man Jeremiah back on the phone, which means I'm going to have to hang up on you too, John, and we'll just see what happens here.
All right.
All right. So
okay.
We will be back in hopefully just over a minute.
Hey, sports fans. Chris and Graham here from the Grueling Truth Network.
Baseball's boring. It's too slow. Where's the fun in it? If you think that, then why the hell aren't you listening to Out of Left Field with us on thegruelingtruth.net?
On our show, we make baseball way more than just a bunch of numbers. You'll laugh with us, probably yell at us, and hopefully learn a thing or two from us.
Ever wonder what it's like to be a major league umpire or why they made the call they did? Lucky for you, we have our own umpire on the show, even have big league umpires stopping by from time to time, and even the occasional big leaguer or two.
And all of that's just the first 10 minutes. Come on by and join the fun. Listen to Out of Left Field with Grant and me every week on thegruelingtruth.net.
Hello.
And give us a follow on Twitter and Facebook.
Just search.
Replenishing Technologies helps athletes of all levels train, recover, and perform at their absolute best. We do this by offering the PEMF 120, the world's leading pulsed electromagnetic field therapy device. Workouts, injury, and stress cause cells to lose their natural power. PEMF works like a battery charger, helping cells regain the power needed to dump toxins, take in oxygen and nutrients, and repair. 95% of athletes report less pain, increased range of motion, more energy, and they simply feel better after using PEMF 120. If you'd like to count yourself among that group, contact us at www.replenishingtechnologiesinc.com. All right, guys, we're back on The Grueling Truth. Inside Boxing Weekly Special Edition. Looking forward to the Triple G Canelo 2 card. And Jeremiah Preisser is back. What's up, Jeremiah?
Hey, how's it going?
John, you there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
All right, I had to do some magic work here real quick, but we're going to start off. We're going to look at this card. Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez was considered by many boxing observers to be anywhere from the number 1 to 3 pound-for-pound man in the world entering 2017. He was captivating to watch. HBO, took a big interest in the flyweight, which they hadn't done in probably 20-plus years. And he is going to start off this card against Moses Fuentes. And I would think that this is probably just a fight to get him back on track, John.
Yeah, Fuentes has lost 3 out of his last 4, as we just mentioned a little bit ago. My sense is Gonzalez is done. I do have to just say it. I think he'll win this one. He's a heavy favorite. The opponent's in there for Gonzalez to win. But, I really do respect his career, what he's accomplished. To me, he's one of the fighters in modern present-day boxing who really has accomplished a lot legitimately. And, he's had a great career to me already. But I just got to call it like I see it. My sense is he's done. He got beat to the punch badly in that Sora Rungvisai rematch. He hadn't looked as great in his last couple of fights before that, even though he was still coming away with wins. And, he may get by this one. He's obviously got the right to do what he wants. The longer I followed boxing, I actually come to that more. We may think as, followers of the sport that the guy should retire, but ultimately it's the fighter's decision. It's his life. So he can go on, but I got to say my gut feeling is he's done. So I figure he gets by this one. We'll try to see how he looks. We can gauge anything against this opponent, but I think when he runs up against stiffer opposition at this point, it's not going to come out good for him again.
So I agree with John on this one, but my question to you, Jeremiah, is there a possibility that he just ran into somebody in Sor Rungvisai who was just better than him? Or just a bad matchup?
Well, I do think that, I think you've got to account for all of these details. It's one of those things where, Gonzalez has been in some tough fights, so he's not, and the little guys age quicker than others because the speed of the game is quicker down there. So I think it's a little bit of both, but I certainly see how Rungvisai, a very physical guy with good pop is, and I think we even talked about it on previous shows where eventually his weight jumping is going to come to a halt because physically he's not going to be able to match up. It's one thing when you're a pure boxer like an Ivan Calderon type, and you're down there and, those guys don't seem to age as quickly. But when you're a physical guy like Roman Gonzalez, you've got to impose your will. You try to outwork everybody. Your power is significant in the lower weight divisions. It matters more. But in this regard, it could be that he met somebody who is, just always going to be as better in a division like that. But it's also one of those things where you go undefeated for so long, and you beat the top flight competition and, you're generally regarded as the best fighter in the world. I think it takes a little bit out of your psyche. And I think that's probably what's happened here is not only that he's had that taken away from him, but that he's also aged a little bit. And so now, he's fighting in a new weight class and, he's trying to get his bearings about him, make a mark there. And I actually don't mind it if he's paired right. Again, like John said, guys are going to continue their career regardless. But I think if you're going to, do something with Gonzalez, I actually think they should have paired him with Donnie Nietes, who got a draw on the HBO Superfly 3 card. And I think they could have just given him some vacant alphabet trinket, and I think he would have done all right against a guy who's not that big of a puncher, a guy who's a little faded himself. But, we'll see what kind of mark he makes here. And I heard that Nietes is, might fight in December, and, maybe they'll set that one up.
All right, next up, and I think this is an entertaining fight. I don't think they're necessarily great fighters, but we got former IBF champion David Lemieux, who is arguably fighting to stay relevant in the 160-pound division. He lost to Golovkin in 2015, and less than a year ago he got thoroughly embarrassed by Billy Joe Saunders. Opposite of him is Gary Spike O'Sullivan, a longtime French contender who looks to come forward and trade in the pocket at a high pace. And his TKO win against Antoine Douglas on the Sanders-Lemieux undercard, by the way. He threw 447 punches in 7 rounds. Now, my question, Jeremiah, is this. O'Sullivan has been outclassed by Billy Joe Saunders and Chris Eubank Jr. But when I look at this fight, David Lemieux he's a knockout artist. He doesn't have the skill of Billy Joe Saunders or even Chris Eubank Jr., believe it or not. And when I look at this fight, I've got 2 things. Number 1, how much does Lemieux have left? And number 2, will O'Sullivan's style of throwing a lot of punches put him in more harm's way than Saunders did against Lemieux and give Lemieux a chance to knock him out?
Yeah, I certainly think so. Spike O'Sullivan is he just looking at his talent by itself, he seems to be on a level, just above, the top guys. So I think fringe contender kind of sums it up. David Lemieux, however, is, like you said, he's been around for a little while. He's taken some beatings and whatnot. Not only from Saunders, but, a clear loss to Golovkin. But another thing, too, is that he's struggled with his weight a lot in recent years. I mean, he's looked slightly flabby. He's not, just put in the type of work that you would want from a guy who was ranked in the top 10 for years. I mean, it's been a bit disappointing seeing him come in like that. And Sullivan is a guy who comes in prepared every single time. So there will be that aspect where O'Sullivan looks to outpunch Lemieux, but O'Sullivan is also a decent puncher himself. But I do think his work rate is going to open up opportunities for Lemieux, who, even though he's not that great against, real good boxer types like Saunders or, superior technicians like Golovkin, Lemieux, when he's fighting somebody who comes at him, and him being the bigger physical force, him being the bigger puncher, I think that bodes well for him, and I think he's going to score a stoppage here.
All right. John, do you agree? And my other question to you, John, is this. Will Spike O'Sullivan try to change the way he fights?
No, I don't think he'll change the way he fights. I'm going to tentatively, go with Lemieux here, but I just don't have a lot of faith in him. It is a better style matchup for him. He doesn't respond well to people that are boxing him. Golovkin actually chose to box him a bit more. Saunders made him look silly. But, we saw against Rubio, he had the stamina problem and he got stopped. He lost to Alcine. Yet, he does have, he's a little wide with it, but he does have some hand speed. I think he's faster than O'Sullivan, and he does hit harder. I'm going to lean toward, the odds on the fight are pretty close, but Lemieux's a favorite. I think Lemieux will just have a little bit too much offensive firepower for O'Sullivan, but it's the type of fight that it wouldn't shock me if O'Sullivan won the fight. I just think, like Jeremiah said, Lemieux, he has actually missed weight in some recent fights. You wonder about his conditioning. And as good as the knockouts looked against people like Stevens, and he ended the fight quick against a shot Glenn Tapia. But you have fights people forget, like, he went the distance with Reyes. There's been some others like that. Then he goes the distance it's not that you're going to necessarily knock everybody out, but against some guys that really aren't that difficult competition, guys that he should shine against. And so if you're looking for that against O'Sullivan, you might not automatically get it. And I guess that's what makes this a little bit interesting. I think, of course, O'Sullivan, he lost to Eubank and Saunders, and he beat Douglas, I was high on coming up, but he lost that war with Curtsidi. I said at the time I thought he was damaged afterward. I think that's shown. So it's not O'Sullivan's fault, so to speak. He did his job, but I just don't know if Antoine Douglas, he's young. I just don't know if he had anything left after that Curtsidi beating in that war. So I'm not sure what that means, and that'll be just enough for me to lean towards Lemieux in this one.
Yeah, I think Lemieux shot, and I don't know if Spike O'Sullivan will ever have a prime, so I don't know what to do here. I'll take Spike O'Sullivan, just because last week I was the only one right when we picked the main event. Next up, had to bring that up. Next up, we got Jaime Munguia versus Brandon Cook, and Jaime Munguia, John, thinks this is 1955. This will be his 5th fight of the year so far.
Yeah, as you know, I like Munguia a lot. I would have liked him to look a little sharper against Liam Smith. I just think he was a little, he still got the job done, and I think just because he's got the fire and enthusiasm and the heart, he was able to wear down Liam Smith, even though he was really over anxious and just swinging wild and didn't look good. He definitely didn't look good. There's no doubt about that, but he's a young guy. I've been high on him for a while. I thought he was the best prospect I saw last year, and I think it's coming to fruition this year. I'm still high on him. I'm not going to get down on him because of the Liam Smith fight. I think that against Cook, he should blow him out. He should get back to it's an opponent kind of for that purpose and to keep Munguia active. And this is a good exposure opportunity to him. Obviously, there's a fight on the horizon between him and, Canelo Alvarez that could be huge and probably not that far in the distant future. So it's a good marketing move. I anticipate Munguia will get back to his early knockout self. If he doesn't, of course, we'll have to see how the fight plays out. But if he doesn't, we'll have to look if there's any difficulties there for him. But I think he should get the job done quickly in this one. One thing, last fight actually was the first fight his father wasn't the lead trainer. So some people think about the father's being a negative in the corner. Munguia's father was a fighter. Maybe in his case, what was working you should have stuck with. We'll see. We'll see how that plays out Saturday night as well. But I think he'll get back onto his into his early knockout form.
I think he's going to have a hard time knocking Cook out early, though. I think Cook takes a pretty good punch, but I also think Cook's terrible defensively. So I think this is a fight, Jeremiah, that is tailor-made to look Munguia look good.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, I think after his, mediocre performance against Liam Smith, they gotta, bring back the hype and make people feel positive about him again. And yeah, that makes sense. It's fine. I mean, if they're going to potentially showcase this as a potential opponent for Canelo Alvarez, yeah, I mean, you gotta build the hype somehow. I mean, and I think it happens. I mean, I think you both are right. I mean, Cook does seem to take a pretty solid shot, but Munguia, I think, is the bigger guy, and eventually he's going to wear him down. And Cook's not quite as skilled as Liam Smith, so it is what it is. We're going to get a stoppage here, likely. Like John said, if he doesn't get it, a lot of people are going to be upset. It's not going to build the brand as much as they would like to, but yeah, you're probably looking at a stoppage.
All right, and of course, the biggest story of the week: Oscar De La Hoya is considered to run for president. John.
Well, I agreed with the people that were making fun of it in the sense of, and I think they're actually probably right. It doesn't probably speak too well for the pay-per-view numbers on the advance orders. So, I was wondering if we're going to see any other circus promotions over the next couple of days before Saturday night when it's time to order the pay-per-view. The $84.99 price tag is steep, so Oscar's probably out there working as hard as he can.
Yes, it is, but people paid $100 for Conor McGregor and Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah, and Pacquiao, Mayweather, those were huge events. This is obviously a better fight at this point than those, but, it just doesn't have that event thing. It just doesn't have that event kind of thing to it. So as much as we might hate that.
Fans?
Yeah, for boxing fans it does, but that just doesn't generate those other kind of numbers and people getting interested. So it's just sort of a different dynamic, and it could hurt this one.
All right, so let's look at it. Gennady Golovkin versus Canelo Alvarez 2. Has everybody watched HBO 24/7 now, John?
Yeah, I mean, I have. I
don't know. Jeremiah, do you think he's lying to us right now? He sounded unsure.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, that was the only homework you got last week. It's the only homework we had.
Yeah,
we had all week. It's an hour.
I've been taking in so much Canelo Triple G material. My head's spinning with all of it. I got to sort it all out.
Yeah, but you got to watch 24/7 because you don't have to read. And as we get older, it's harder to read because the words get smaller and smaller. What's your take on the build-up? We'll start off with Jeremiah. Jeremiah, what's your take of the build-up? The supposed bad blood, whether it's there or not. I always, no matter who the guys are and no matter what the backstory is, I always think that most of that's kind of contrived. I think maybe it's not here. I think maybe these guys don't like each other. What do you think, Jeremiah?
Yeah, well, I generally both are pretty respectable and, not really into the big trash talking stuff. And I just think they've been forced to talk more than they want to because, just the situation surrounding the fight itself. I mean, with the the testing and, and Abel Sanchez and, the hand wrapped thing and, and Golovkin's insinuation that there were, poke marks and stuff like that. I think that it's just had to, it's just naturally generated more animosity because of this. I mean, if you're Canelo, you don't like your character being slandered. If you genuinely feel that you're a clean fighter, and of course with Abel Sanchez, he has a tendency to talk a little bit more than a lot of people would like to, and and then Golovkin, with the track mark thing, and it's just I do think I think that was manifest today actually when they had the conference and Golovkin was willing to meet Canelo Alvarez face to face, but Canelo said, no, I'll pass. I'll wait until it's game time, and then I'll see him. So, and not only that, I think they're playing some mind games with each other as well, whereas, you look at Canelo Alvarez, and during the open media workout, he leaves his shirt on, and he's actually, during that workout, he was actually putting in work. He was putting in rounds on the mitts, and he was acting as if this was a full-blown workout session. And then you had Golovkin, who was very, relaxed and, just seemed to be pretty sure of himself. So I do think that there is more animosity here, and I do hope that it reflects in the ring. But of course, we've been at this a long time. We know how this works.
Yeah.
It's hard to tell just what exactly will happen. And not only that, you don't really have commitments to some differing game plan. It seems as if you listen to Canelo's side, it's pretty much going to be the same thing, but they're just hoping his stamina improves and he throws more punches. And then Golovkin, he's not going to take a backward step and, all of a sudden become a boxer. That's just not in his blood. So I think we're going to get much of the same thing. But what I'm hoping is because of, the real animosity, I do think that they're just more focused. I just hope that they're less gun shy, because you had Golovkin who didn't go to the body as much as he should have, and you had Canelo who just didn't throw as many punches as he should have. So I'm just hoping that animosity sharpens the edges and we get something at least like the first fight, but just a little bit more action.
Yeah, John?
Yeah, in terms of, to me, this is the intangible stuff that I think you can make a mistake in looking at it like these are going to be the things that drive the fight. So I try not to do that, but with that out of the way and understood first, what I see in the lead up is, first of all, on the animosity thing, I think, one thing listening to Gil Clancy taught me decades ago, when you always used to listen to him, he would say in these situations, watch after the fight, these guys will have respect for each other and after being in the ring for another 12 rounds together or less. And that does always tend to happen. So I think that's probably what will even happen at the end of this one. But in the intangibles that usually don't decide things, but I'm looking at, from my perspective, I personally do think that, Golovkin and his camp, there's been too much talk and complaining that to me almost reflects like a lack of confidence, like Kovalev going into that second Ward fight, which I did mention that going into that one. And I think on Canelo, maybe he's got a little more motivation, along the lines of what Jeremiah said. But the thing you have to keep in the back of your mind is, Canelo's a 28-year-old guy that made $40 million in his last fight. And, no matter how much pride you have, no matter how tough you are, and you take pride in your craft, and obviously Canelo and Golovkin, who made $20 million the first time, and he's 36 years old, they both do. I've learned, and especially in rematches, it can get tough when you've gotten paid that kind of money to come out with the kind of ferocity you might expect, as good as these guys both are. So I think maybe to me in the motivation corner, I slant towards Canelo, but when guys have gotten paid that kind of money and it's a rematch, sometimes you wonder, and just sometimes that can surprisingly just take the intensity off of here. It wouldn't completely shock me if Golovkin actually tries to stay back behind his jab a little more, because he just didn't have the confidence going to the body in the first fight and really going all out with the pressure. He always comes forward, but you saw against Jacobs, you saw against Canelo, and you even saw a little bit against Lemieux. When he feels like somebody can hurt him, he tends to fight in a little bit of a different style. In other words, he goes out to plow over the Murrays, the Macklins, the Rubios, but he doesn't fight in that style against Jacobs or Canelo in the first fight. So he might back off a little there. And I think Jeremiah made a good point before the first fight about Canelo with the stamina, and I see it the way he does. I think in this fight, Canelo's really, the strategy will just be to be in better shape, to just fight the middle rounds at a better pace. That to me was the one flaw with his performance in the first fight, and that he's got to correct that. That part I agree with, and I think that's what their game plan probably will be to do, but I don't think the style will be particularly different.
Yeah, but how do you correct that since you've always had a stamina problem?
That's part where it can be mental and training. We're not in his camp. It's just the plain old, you do have to be in better shape, aerobically.
Yeah, but see, I think this, from the times when I used to play things years and years ago, I think that once that gets in your mind, no matter how good a shape you get in, that when it's in the back of your mind, it's hard to get out of it. And I know me and Jeremiah had this conversation about this a while back on the phone, and it was like the Austin Trout fight. He starts getting tired in the 8th or 9th round. Against Golovkin, he looked like he was starting to get tired in the 4th or 5th round, and I would think that was probably just because he had to worry so much about getting tagged, where you don't have to worry as much about it against Austin Trout.
Yeah, I think with Canelo, that can be possible, but I think with him, it might just be conditioning. That's like when you're, sometimes when you're not confident in your conditioning, because he fought the last rounds hard. So, that to some degree, that's a confidence in your condition, and he's got to be in better shape, have more confidence in his conditioning, where he can fight harder during the course of the full 12 rounds, rather than feel like he's got to, take rounds off more. That's what I think, and I think he will be in better shape for this one, and I think that probably, will help him in this fight. That's what I think will happen. We're going to find out Saturday. That's something you don't really know until you see the fight play out. But I suspect that he's going to be aerobically in a little bit better shape for this fight.
Yeah, I think he could be in better shape, but like you said, Mike, we have talked about it in the past, and you have things like mental stamina. Where you look at a guy like James Toney. I've used this example in the past. The guy just spars for training. He does little else, but he can still go 12 rounds. So the thing, is that Alvarez may be in better shape, but if Golovkin actually does come more aggressively, because, I saw Abel Sanchez today saying that, the plan is to start quicker, not let Canelo get as relaxed in there. If, they do follow through with that game plan, it could be, and Golovkin does land, some better punches. And because that was kind of the thing in the first fight, is Golovkin, he landed a significant amount of jabs. That punch landed more than any punch in the entire fight. But if he's able to land, more accurately, unlike, because in the first fight, he landed some good shots, but by and large, he landed little of note in terms of power punches. So to me, Alvarez didn't really feel, the full force of what Golovkin is capable of. So if Golovkin can somehow adjust his game plan and lay heavier pressure on Alvarez, it could be one of those things, like, regardless if Alvarez is in better shape, mentally he may cave quicker because of, again, the pressure that Golovkin is putting on him. So it will be interesting to see, of course, if they play it safe, as if, kind of like John is talking about, and they, work behind their jabs and, tentatively counterpunch each other. Yeah, neither one should have any problem going 12 rounds then. But if, the edge is there, the intensity is up, and they actually are fighting a bit harder, it will be interesting to see how Alvarez reacts. Because I know Golovkin he's been a little tentative in fights as well, but I know Golovkin can throw a lot of punches if push comes to shove. I mean, if I'm not mistaken, he threw over 800 punches against Martin Murray. And again, he didn't have to fear as much coming back, but I know Golovkin can up his work rate if he wants to.
All right. My other question would be this, and we'll go with Jeremiah because I asked John last one first. But the fact that Canelo's main thing here is to have better stamina kind of, makes it look like the clenbuterol claim may not have been for meat, because when you look at it, clenbuterol is the best, is what most athletes use to increase their stamina. It helps transport, oxygen through the blood, more blood vessels move through the entire system, and the actual stamina of people rises, and this is proven. So, when you look at this, it kind of makes sense to me now why he used it, Jeremiah.
Well, I think if you're in a stamina, a sport that prizes itself on longevity like this one, there are tons and tons of boxers who are cutting corners and using clenbuterol and all sorts of other stuff. Right. But I don't think we have to, I don't think we have to read that in here. It could just be that, hey, even on, whether he's on clenbuterol or not, the fact remains is that he needs to punch more. He needs to fight through the middle rounds harder. So, again, it could just be something as simple as that. And not only that, if he used clenbuterol in the past and he's, throwing barely over 500 punches against, Austin Trout and Erislandy Lara, et cetera, stamina could just be one of those things. And
that's kind of my point in all this. It wasn't to bring up the clenbuterol. It was to bring up the fact that I think no matter what he does, I think it's in his head. Come on, we've seen the guy train. He looks ripped. He looks like he's in shape, but he still gets tired. And whether that's from being tense when he's fighting or whatever it is, to me, I think that is a huge factor in this fight, because with Golovkin, my biggest question is his age. And he hasn't fought the veins mud erosion thing, but that was a joke. But he hasn't really fought at a high level since he fought Canelo a year ago. So he's had basically a year off except for the mud erosion fight. So I would say the question to me is Canelo's stamina against Golovkin's age.
Yeah, and funny enough, that may just kind of level itself out. You may get a similar activity from both guys, and I do think that the initial rounds will be telling, because if Golovkin can find a home, to the body, it'll be interesting to see the way Alvarez reacts, and also if Alvarez starts quickly, like we're hoping that he does, and he did in the first fight, or sort of quickly. It's not as if he was lighting it up in the first round, but the second round. But that's the thing is, I think we'll see early on how it really plays out, because again, through 2 rounds against Martirosyan, that didn't tell us a whole lot. But it's good that Golovkin kept in shape. He didn't take a year off. He didn't have to worry about it. As an old guy, it's kind of an important thing.
Yeah.
But I think we'll see. I think we'll see early on how that plays out. If Golovkin feels comfortable throwing more punches, as does Alvarez, we'll see how that plays out. Because if they're starting off quickly, we'll see who teeters out first, and see if that makes the difference in the fight.
Yeah, and I think the whole key to this fight, John, is whether Canelo goes to the body or not. Because I think if he goes to the body, I think he wins the fight. If he doesn't go to the body, he doesn't win the fight.
Well, I think he beat up Golovkin's body good in the first fight. He landed the vast, Golovkin hardly landed anything.
Golovkin hitting Canelo in the body.
Golovkin's not going to. Golovkin, I think that there's talk about that before this fight, and that's where I think, this is, of course, my opinion, but that's where I think that the people, looking for certain things from Golovkin in this fight are looking at it the wrong way, and it's misplaced. Golovkin didn't go to the body in the first fight with Canelo, not because it was a choice thing, because it was a strategy where that's what he wanted to do, that he didn't want to go to the body. he didn't go to the body because he couldn't, because Canelo's too fast for him. He's going to get his head countered off. He was taking a lot of head shots in the first fight. Canelo out-power punched him in the first fight, as Jeremiah alluded to, and that is what happened. And I don't think Golovkin can change that. Canelo's too fast for him, and I don't think that's going to change. I think because Canelo is too fast for him, I think that he takes too much punishment in return if he tries to put on too much pressure. So I think that's what I think is going to limit his options here. I think some of these things that people are looking for out of him, he's just not going to be able to do. If somehow he can get to the body, I mean, he can be a devastating body puncher and hurt you to the body. On our show before the first fight, looking at it from Canelo's perspective, that's something that, you would have to have a concern about. And Golovkin can kind of turn a fight like that. But I just think that it proved that I figured Canelo was fast.
Yeah, he's
so much
faster, but Golovkin won the first fight. I mean, 90% of the public that saw it agrees with that.
Golovkin, didn't win the first fight. The fight was a draw. I thought Canelo won won the fight.
Yeah.
When
you look at like 200 boxing people, like 190 of them had Triple G winning a fight.
Well, a lot of them, a lot of people didn't as well, and
I don't think it was a lot, John.
The fight was a draw. I mean,
the fight was a draw.
Kevin Iole had a good piece about some boxing experts talking about this fight and talking about the first fight yesterday, and a lot of them thought the fight was a draw. There's ones that thought Canelo won. I mean, I think that.
So you think it was like 50-50 on what people thought?
No, I'm not saying it was 50-50, but I'm just not saying I don't necessarily greatly concern myself what the percentages were. I mean, it was a draw. A draw certainly was a reasonable result for what occurred in that fight. I thought Canelo did enough to win it, but I didn't think that the draw was anything out of the ordinary. I mean, Jeremiah had it 115, 113 for Golovkin. One round the other way, it's a draw. I mean, to argue a draw was a ridiculous decision, I just don't think that that's the case. I don't think that's what played out. I think if people truly believe that Golovkin had a dominant performance in the first fight, that they would be much more confident about what would be happening in this fight, and then I don't see that. So there's some kind of disconnect there, from what I see. But I just don't think that Golovkin's going to be able to, go to the body because of his fear of getting countered. And that's probably, he stayed behind the jab and, the last time. And he uses the jab. His jab's okay. I personally don't buy this thing. He doesn't really have a punishing jab. It's not dramatic when you see it during the fight. So, that's not, and I've said many times, and I still do, I respect Golovkin's knockout streak. I think it was good for boxing. I think that's impressive when you're, taking care of business like that for that long. But, that's not what he's been able to do, against people like Canelo and Jacobs. So it's kind of something different we're seeing in there. It's not fighting, Matt Arosian, who hasn't fought in 2 years and has got 2 weeks notice. I mean, that's when he's walking through guys, but I just don't think he's going to be able to do that with Canelo because of the fear of getting countered and, Canelo's hand speed. And I think with a Canelo just a little bit better prepared to go at a little better pace through the full 12, I think the damage he's going to accumulate in this fight combined with what he did in the first fight is going to be a problem for Golovkin as we get into the later rounds.
All right, Jeremiah.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that Golovkin's jab is okay. I mean, when you're 35, 36 years old and you're able to land it, with heavy dosage, I find that pretty impressive. And not only that, I mean, you look at the Lemieux fight; it certainly looked powerful, and it's been powerful enough to deter people from throwing a lot of power punches at him. But yeah, I mean, I do think John's got a point there where he's talking about how, Golovkin was tentative because he was getting counterpunched. And I do think that is correct. But, I just don't foresee, no possible avenues to body punching. I mean, yeah, if Golovkin wants to rely on the left hook, he might have an issue there with Canelo's right uppercut. But of course, I think he could streamline things a little bit. He could throw the straight right hand of the body, which will get him out of harm's way a little bit quicker. So I don't think there's no roads, to bang into the body. But of course, I think a lot of this will kind of be predicated on how well his jab does, and and if that happens to be the key in the fight, like it was in the first fight, then I think maybe there will be some avenues there. But of course, it's hard to say, and whether these guys throw more punches or not, it's still something that is yet to be seen. But Golovkin, I think, besides the body punching, I would like to see him mix his jab up a little bit more. I mean, his jab is, the technique is great. I mean, the accuracy is wonderful. I think the power is there. I think it's probably the best jab in boxing, to be frank. But I think that if he wants to be more effective in the fight, he's got to mix the jab up. I think he's got to feint a little bit more. He's got to come at him with different speeds. And I think that's one thing that he could have done better in the first fight is a lot of times the jab would come off in the same way. I mean, his feinting is good, but, if he did feint, the jab, again, it would come off the same way. Come off the hip, it was fine, accurate, whatever. But I think if he wants to mix things up and confuse Canelo a little bit, he's got to feint better. He's got to feint differently. You look at Canelo Alvarez, and Alvarez is definitely a guy who could stand to use his jab more, which would help set up his offense, especially, in this fight. If he wanted to counterpunch Golovkin more effectively, I think one of his best bets would be to use that as bait and, lure Golovkin in, let Golovkin react, and then counterpunch him. But it's also Golovkin's key in the sense that if he can feint a bit better, maybe he can throw a left hook. You're right. You look at an example that I think of is the Maidana-Broner fight where Maidana was jabbing a lot to the body, and then Broner kept it, he started to expect it. And then Maidana feinted to the body and came up top with a hook. Now, those are the sort of things that, another example is Johnny Gonzalez versus Abner Mares, how he kept jabbing to the body as well, and then he feinted up top and cracked him with a left hook. I think Golovkin's got to be a bit more creative in that sense, and I also think Alvarez has to be more creative. Again, the jab, I think, is going to be essential, especially for Golovkin. Alvarez may be able to rely on his speed and possibly get the job done, but I think that'll be a tool that, both men should utilize more effectively, but we'll see.
All right, so you wrote an article about decisions in the past with Canelo. We talked about this one a little bit. Do you think that Golovkin can win a decision against Canelo, Jeremiah?
I think so. Yeah, I do. I mean,
you think he'll let him win it?
I don't want. Well, I mean, yeah, I think so. I mean, if it happens to be a close fight again, either way, I think if Canelo gets the decision, uncontroversially, I think that it's more likely there won't be a third fight, and the world will be his oyster, and he can pick who he wants to, and collect big paydays, huge paydays from here on out. I also think that Golovkin, I do think that he can earn a decision here. There's even more scrutiny on this fight, and I know how boxing works. If it really comes down to the wire, I don't see any reason why they wouldn't say, hey, give it a draw again. Let's go with a third fight or whatever. But I do think Golovkin, if he wins clear enough, I think that he can earn a decision. I don't think we're going to see another Adelaide Bird type scorecard here.
All right, we'll go ahead and ask John the same question, even though we know what he's going to say.
Well, I mean, yeah, he can get a decision. There's one thing you got to look at these judges' scorecards is Steve Farr had pointed it out, and he's on the right track here on the Garcia-Porter card. He said that of all three judges, they only scored 4 rounds the same out of the 12. And, I'd have to go out to old scorecards like Canelo Golovkin won. You could do it with other fights. But even when some of these judges have the fight scored close and maybe each has a different guy winning, the 3 judges are not scoring the rounds the same. That's my point about, how subjective it is, and that really if a judge is just not trying to alternate rounds as to who they're giving the close rounds to, you really can get scorecards that seem way out of whack. You had one judge in Leonard Hagler, famously giving Sugar Ray a huge advantage.
Jutras, 118 to 109.
Yeah, I used to know all that by heart, but I forget who did it. But it was like 118, 109 or whatever. And it's not that there's never been any politics in any situation, but boxing's subjective, and when you actually look at, like, in other words, even if 2 judges will have a fight 115, 112, and we say, oh, that's fair, they got it right, they'll all have different rounds scored for different guys. So, in other words, if you would just look at it and say, well, what if subjectively you turned it around? I mean, you could have all kinds of crazy combinations. So, I just think a lot of that kind of stuff goes on. So, you got one judge the same as the first fight who scored it for Golovkin, so he's already scored it for Golovkin the first time. And then you got Steve Weisfeld, and I forget who the other judge they brought in. Moretti's the guy that had it for Golovkin the first time. But I don't think it'll be unfair, but just the way things are and the fans are and people who have their favorites, I almost do dread a close decision. Just either guy getting it one way or the other, because you're going to have a lot of controversy and a lot of complaining, a lot of theories, and it'd be nice if we could avoid that. If one of the 2 guys wins it decisively or there's a knockout, I could do without another quote unquote controversy about the result.
Let me ask you this, John: do you think Canelo could knock out Golovkin?
I actually think that he can, and I think Golovkin's got, just so I'm clear, I think Golovkin has got one of the best chins in boxing, if not the best chin in boxing. I think that, Canelo does as well. I think, though, the way I see it here, and that's the way I'm leaning, but where I think Canelo could just accumulate punishment with his hand speed, and I think Golovkin's the harder puncher here, but I think Canelo punches well enough that, considering what I feel like he stacked up and put in the bank in the first fight, and then he accumulates another, say, 8 rounds of punishment here, that I think Golovkin at 36, I think he could go. I think that's a real possibility here. And that's the way I would see it playing out. It's hard enough to even pick who wins, never mind how it plays out. But I see that kind of a scenario here. But the problem with that scenario for me is that, I talked about Golovkin fighting different against certain. He has a guy overmatched, and sometimes even when he does, this is one thing I don't like about Canelo. He's overly cautious. So the problem I have with my scenario there is, even if I think that Canelo is really accumulating punishment on Golovkin and starting to hurt him, break him down late in the fight, does he have the mentality to be aggressive enough and take the risk against a puncher like Golovkin to try to get a stoppage? That's the part about that scenario that I'm a little bit hesitant on.
So basically, you think they're both afraid of each other?
I think you get that, and when they fought once each other. They've already fought. I think you get that respect that doesn't get talked about. But yeah, I think you see that a lot of times in certain rematches. So, as good as both guys are, and as much as I respect them as fighters, I think with that factor combined with the money they've already made, I think you get that a lot of times in a rematch like this. So I think that there is a possibility for. I'm not saying it's going to be a bad fight. I think it'll still be a good fight, but I think that there is a possibility for some tentativeness from both guys.
I think it'll be a good fight in spurts. I think everybody thinks we're going to see Hagler-Hearns since they're talking all the crap they're talking to each other. But I think these 2 guys are guys that fight in a particular style, and that's the way they fight, and that's it. I think we learned that for sure with Canelo against Floyd Mayweather, when he basically had nothing to go to when, plan A didn't work.
He definitely got outboxed Mayweather. There's no doubt about that.
But
you're
the
right.
Fight scored a draw by one of the judges. Go ahead, Jeremiah.
Yeah, they must have been one of those things where he was alternating rounds, and he just somehow ended up with 6-6. No, I think you're right. I mean, in regards to their particular styles, that Golovkin at 36, with as many fights that he's had, I mean, what he's coming up on, 390 fights total, amateur and professional together. You're not going to get much different there. Canelo, I think the Mayweather example is perfect. It was one of those things where when I was, going into the fight, and Alvarez was still young and
I
thought
Canelo had a chance to win
malleable.
the fight. And by the fourth round, I'm thinking, damn, I'm an idiot.
Well, I thought he was young and malleable. So and being a Mexican, the stereotype kind of plays on your mind. You're like, oh, well, maybe Alvarez can get in there and bang the smaller guy up. I thought if he had any chance at winning, that's what he was going to do. He was just going to go bully the small guy. His hands were quick enough. You could grab him, hold him, I don't know, something. But yeah, instead he just chose to box, and he ended up getting shut out.
Yeah.
Geez, sorry.
So this is the question. Either one of these guys all-time greats, Joan?
Well, I think it's going to depend. It's going to depend how we define it. I think
Well,
if we
are
talk,
they a top 10 middleweight of all time, or
right? That's
what
what I was just going to. That's what I was
the
just
only
going
way
to get
you
to.
can define it, I think.
Well, if you're going to define it as top 10 middleweights of all time, they're not going to make that. For me right now, I mean, Canelo is going to have years left, but I don't. Well, who knows? I mean, maybe I don't know exactly what's going to happen this Saturday night. I mean, if Golovkin somehow knocks out Canelo and then picks up a couple more big wins or something, maybe we'll be looking at it differently. But that's not the scenario I'm looking at.
We're not talking about what could happen, because let's face it, nowadays it's hard to be an all-time great because you don't have enough people to beat to be an all-time great. Gennady Golovkin, I think, with the way he fights, would have given anybody in his prime 4 or 5 years ago a hard fight. But I don't think he's an all-time great, because I don't know that 100% for sure, because I've never seen him fight a great fighter.
I mean, neither of them are in the top 10 middleweights of all time for me at this point.
No.
Golovkin has said last week that, and I think he's right, he said that, Canelo is the best fighter that he's ever fought. So, I do concur with him there. And, that's why I think this, and I think Jeremiah has agreed. I mean, I think that's why this series of fights is important for him. I think that, it does have an effect on his legacy. And, to me, if you're a Golovkin fan, just have confidence. And, if he gets this win Saturday night, you can make some pretty good arguments for his legacy. But if he doesn't get it done, I don't think he'll be able to. And then, he beat Jacobs, but he had a rough time, and had to draw with Canelo the first time. Then it just comes down to speculation as to what he was, and kind of speculation doesn't really leave you on those top levels.
Well, I can tell you this, John: beating Canelo Alvarez, even knocking him out in the first round, doesn't put him anywhere near an all-time great. It just doesn't. Not to me. I'm a Golovkin fan, but if he beat Jacobs, if he was to fight Jacobs again after this and beat him, dominate Billy Joe Saunders, beat the Charlo brothers, yeah, then maybe I can buy it. But he's too old to do all that.
I don't know. I look at it kind of like Jeremiah and I have said when we look at the Hopkins example, and we've kind of agreed. I do think Golovkin falls into that. I could see the argument against it, but for me, it's sort of like a reverse legacy validation. If he takes Canelo out, let's say your scenario, in boxing, things like this do happen once in a while in Chakas. If he comes out Saturday night and he knocks Canelo out in 1 or 2 rounds, then all of a sudden all the victories before that and the knockout streak. Yeah, exactly. They look a lot better. And for Canelo, if he takes out Golovkin, and then let's say, because again, in boxing, you never know, if he stays motivated, let's say he beats Munguia next year, and then he finishes his career with a big win at light heavyweight or something like that, where he boxes more like a Tony or something like that, then you're talking about greatness. That's what makes this kind of a fight to me
That's not greatness.
Interesting. Sure you are.
No, it's
sure
not. Beating Jaime Munguia? Come on. Jaime Munguia has never proved anything. I mean, except he could knock out a smaller Saddam Ali and beat up Liam Smith. I mean, we're really pushing it here. I mean,
I'm just looking at the future for it's not me saying Munguia is an all-time great. It's a point of making, we don't know exactly what the future holds. I'm just speculating about what it might look like. Then you're looking back, and this is how we do look at fighters' legacies. I mean, then you look at Canelo's level of competition over his entire career. Fought a lot of top fighters, and if he just has the loss to Mayweather and the draw with Golovkin, it's looking pretty good. But we don't. That's where it all goes from Saturday night. That to me is what makes this kind of a fight interesting. That's why I care about the historical parts of it, and I know Jeremiah agrees with me on this. And you get into these arguments with people, and to me, it gets frustrating. They just don't seem to get it. They look at alphabet stuff, and
I know what you mean, because people don't seem to get it. I mean, Canelo Alvarez, if you watch him fight, is not a great fighter. Neither is Gennady Golovkin. They're both very good. They're very talented. But I mean, this is my problem, John. I watched Sugar Ray Leonard and I watched Marvin Hagler, and these two guys are nowhere near that. To me, those are all-time greats.
I don't put them in the class with Leonard and Hagler. I would agree with that. But
well, see, there's our discrepancy, because your all-time greats is more than just the all-time greats, because those are all-time greats.
You're looking at guys who really are. You have to also look at guys who are truly at the top of their era, and these are. Hey, sometimes legacy-defining fights come up, and these are that for these two guys. And I think that to me is what makes it interesting. Of course, you want to see a good fight too, but I don't know. For me, that makes it interesting. If people who aren't reading it that way, I don't know exactly what they look at. But that's to me is for this era, what makes it particularly interesting. I'm glad the fight's at middleweight. I'm glad it's not at some junior division or super division, and makes it interesting to me. I think the Ring did make the right decision putting their title on the line for this fight. I think there's, I understand the arguments against it, but I think it's the right decision. It's the right historical decision. And, I care about these types of things. And I think it's, part of what makes this fight meaningful, besides the fact that the two guys are both obviously excellent fighters.
All right, Jeremiah, are they all-time greats?
Yeah. Well, no, they can't be, if we're talking about some hierarchy here where, all-time greats are really, the best of the best to ever do it. Neither one are going to be that. Could they potentially be greats? I mean, if we're talking about, top 10, top 15, maybe top 20, depending on what your criteria is. I mean, there have been a lot of fighters. The sport's been around for over 100 years. I mean, depending on how far you push back the bill. But there's a possibility, that Golovkin could maybe enter, top 20 middleweights, maybe. Again, I'm pretty lenient.
But I think the age is going to be the problem there.
No, I absolutely agree. I personally, I'm pretty lenient because I understand the rationale of a lot of people. And, because the sport is so muddy in itself with all the trinkets and, guys not fighting one another and this and that, I'm pretty lenient in what I allow guys to read into it. Like, you have a number of guys who are historically competent, who put Marcel Cerdan in their top 10. And I see this with guys that, who are well respected, by research organizations and whatnot, who are like, yeah, the guy was a badass, and, his contemporaries thought highly of him. You look at the film, he looks really good, but then you compare Marcel Cerdan with even a guy like, Mike Gibbons or, maybe even James Toney, some of these guys, and you're like, well, Serdan didn't really fight a lot of top-flight opposition. He fought an old Holman Williams. He fought some high-level European guys, and then, his the peak of his performance was against an old Tony Zale, right? And then he loses by injury against Jake LaMotta, right? So you have guys who put these types of guys in their top tens. Again, the Marcel Serdans of the world. So if Golovkin goes out and he knocks Alvarez out, and then he makes some successful title defenses, because the era is heating up. There's a lot of good fighters in his class right now. So if he somehow maintains a high level of performance and beats some of these guys, I wouldn't really, be that upset if somebody, pushed the bill and put him in there. But, resume is the ultimate indicator of what you're actually capable of. And for me, somebody who emphasizes that most, it would be awfully hard to put him in the great category. But again, I offer, I say there's some leniency there, and I'm willing to accept it. I will say that I do know a fellow, and this guy named Bert, and his father actually witnessed Harry Greb fight, and this guy sat ringside for guys like Marcel Cerdan, Sugar Ray Leonard, saw Ike Williams live, et cetera, et cetera. He said, and I don't want to take anybody's opinion as gospel, but he did say that Golovkin is one of the best middleweights that he's seen, and he could have hung with anybody. And I do watch Golovkin and look at his sharpness and technique and power and his chin, and I'm like, well, him versus Tony Zale, that's I don't think it's far-fetched to think maybe he has a chance against Zale or Cerdan or Jake LaMotta or some of these other guys.
So, I think Golovkin could beat all three of those. But I think Golovkin, like I said, could give any of them trouble. It's just hard when the competition he had just wasn't there.
I agree. Well, and real quick, I just wanted to say, I mentioned that sort of thing in one of the pieces that I wrote, how Golovkin is kind of shafted by his era, and I know you guys agree with me here, but if 154 did not exist, guys like Lara, Canelo, Jacobs, Demetrius Andrade, even Floyd Mayweather, if he would have chose to done that and, gone a similar route to the, like Leonards and Robinsons of the world, the era would have been pretty good throughout the whole time. You would have had Paul Williams, Sergio Martinez, again, Andrade, maybe Mayweather, Canelo, et cetera. You would have had those guys competing on that level for years now, but instead, you got too many divisions, you got too many belts, they can avoid one another, play it safe for a while, and you don't get the best fights, and that's exactly why Golovkin didn't get the best of the best as quickly as he should have, and, again, it's just unfortunate.
All right.
I agree with Jeremiah. It's too many belts, too many divisions is what makes it where the competition just isn't there like it should be, and it's a good point. I think that is the really the crux of the problem.
Yeah, too many belts, too many champions. Hell, we got 4 WBA heavyweight champions, don't we now, or something?
Yeah, just at heavyweight.
So,
and left me thinking a little bit about Danny Garcia after Saturday night because, Jeremiah's followed the history. Mike and I go a ways back, and and it sounds like a knock on Danny Garcia, but it's actually not. Like I thought. If Danny Garcia was in a quote-unquote normal boxing era where people were really only caring about 8, at max 9 divisions, and there was basically, one champ really looked at a division, he would be like the good fighter who never won a title. You know what I mean? Like who got maybe 2 title shots and got decision and just couldn't get over the top. But in this era, he's a former unified 140-pound champion.
Yeah, he'd have been like the heavyweight. He'd have been the welterweight version of Jerry Quarry.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's to me when I'm watching them and we see these fights, that's really like what we're seeing. But it gets so confused. And it sounds like I'm knocking Danny Garcia, but I'm actually not. It's just that he's a good fighter, but it's just confused by all this belt stuff, and it even confuses a lot of the fans as to what the guy is. Yeah, he'd be like a welterweight. He'd be like a welterweight Jerry Quarry in this era if it was set up like it should be.
All right, guys. So we got to pick the fight. Who are you taking, Jeremiah?
I am taking Golovkin by decision. It's a tight one, and there's been a lot of good logic thrown around tonight, and I'm willing to look at all points and examine my position and reevaluate. But Yeah, right now I'm going with Golovkin. I mean, I think his jab is the key. I'm hoping that he gets a bit more aggressive, throws more punches, puts Alvarez on the defensive, and gets it done. You know, again, it's fundamental to his legacy to get this fight. I'm hoping he sees that and gives it his all. But I got Golovkin decision.
All right, John.
I'm going to go with Canelo. I think he's got a chance at a late stoppage by accumulation if he's aggressive enough down the stretch. But I'm not certain about that part of it. But I would say he would win a decision otherwise. I just think he did accumulate a lot of head and body punishment on Golovkin in the first fight, and Golovkin is 36. I think he'll pick up where he left off in this one. I think he'll be in a little bit better shape. He's got two things that could go against him or, to me, could go for him. He had the arthroscopic knee surgery, so something was obviously bothering him there. Arthroscopic, as we know, is not particularly serious, so I think that maybe that helps him a little bit, got rid of whatever he's got there. And he has had right hand and thumb problems, and maybe the year off helps him with the hand. That's where I'm going. But that's another thing that could go the other way. You know, if the layoff does hurt him, that could certainly benefit Golovkin. But I think Jeremiah made a good point. It's just a little intangible factor, but I think if Golovkin was a little bit more focused on the importance of the fight for his legacy, it might give him that extra motivation instead of talking about my belts and all this stuff. And maybe Canelo is just feeling like he got disrespected enough to give him a little bit. But when these guys made the kind of money they made in the first fight, you never know how that's going to play out.
All right, I guess we got a split decision. I like Golovkin. We know that. I think Golovkin wins this fight. I think he knocks Canelo out. I think he knocks him out in the 11th round. Canelo has a history of tiring. I believe that Canelo will do differently. I think he will go after him. I think he will go at the body. And I watched him for 12 rounds take Canelo's best shots. Never really saw him in any trouble. He pretty much walked through everything. I think he's going to do that again. I think Canelo knows what he's up against, and because of that, that's why we got this fight 2 years later than what we should have. I think Golovkin wins this fight by 11th round knockout. I really don't have any doubt about that. And there you go, John. So there's a Golovkin fan that doesn't have any doubt. I think this. I think that Canelo had enough doubt in himself after the first fight that he did something to try to enhance himself before the second fight. He got caught. Now he has to fight later. I don't think this gives him motivation because I think he knows Golovkin's right. And in the end, I think Golovkin wins by knockout. Jeremiah, any final words?
Well, my final words would be that, I want to see what a lot of us expect. I mean, unfortunately, it's not something you get much anymore. I mean, really, the quality of fights in general seems to be pretty piss poor. I mean, I'm trying to think of, how often we even get fights as good as, Emmanuel Augustus versus Mickey Ward. And again, you with pay-per-views, you can't expect something like that. With these guys' two styles, you can't expect something like that. But it would just be refreshing to see the guys have genuine animosity and really go at one another, sort of like you saw Tommy Hearns and Marvin Hagler. And unfortunately, again, I know we're decades past that. You don't really get it anymore. But it would just be nice to see a guy put, the pedal to the metal, the balls to the wall, and just go get it. Again, I mean, it's just pay-per-view after pay-per-view of, boring, mundane undercards and a mediocre main event. And I think the first fight was pretty good. I didn't feel that bad splitting the cost with, my family and watching it. But I would just like to see a good undercard and, again, a main event worthy of its price tag. I want to see that. I had a little hope for Vladimir Klitschko when he fought Anthony Joshua to kind of go out on a shield, and to his credit, he surprised me and ended up doing that. I'd like to see these two again focus, get that edge because of the animosity, and actually go get it. Enough of these guys. I think are so focused on winning, to just doing enough to earn the victory. You don't really have guys anymore who go and take the victory, right? They're a lot of these guys are content, pity-patting their way to a decision win. And again, you see it pay-per-view after pay-per-view. The Mayweather-Pacquiao card was the most egregious example of that I can ever think of. And I'd love to see these guys actually go get it. Whether it doesn't have to be Hagler versus Hearns, but I'd like to see them actually just fight 3 minutes every round and get it and leave, no doubt in anybody's mind. Even if they did, if they went out and gave it their all and we got a tight decision, we'd all be satisfied. We could all deal with that.
And it'd make a lot more money the third time.
Absolutely.
Because to me, John, this is why there are no all-time greats anymore, because there's not anybody that does that. I will give this. Vasyl Lomachenko does that. There's a few guys at the top of the pound-for-pound list that will go after that. But, I mean, really, Lomachenko's the only one I can think of, because I don't hear Crawford and Spence, fight or wanting to fight each other or crying to fight each other. They're trying to stay away from each other. John, final words.
Well, I think Jeremiah, summed up why pay-per-view has declined, and he summed it up accurately. They're talking about bringing it back some, but even as good as I feel about the PBC deal, and I do feel good about that, I think any talk of the return of pay-per-view, even in limited circumstances, the wrong direction. There was Tim Smith did say on Kurt Emhoff's podcast that the Fury Wilder, they're still it's still on, but they can't get it. He did kind of say what the problem is there. They can't get it ready for November. And why I'm bringing that up with this discussion with pay-per-view is no, that's going to be an entertaining promotion. Even Tim Smith said that, but the three of us and even he said that nobody's really expecting a good fight.
I'm not expecting him to actually fight in a ring in November or December, to tell you the truth, John.
Yeah. So, and then why I brought that with this pay-per-view discussion is I think we were indirectly and somewhat even directly being told that's why Mikey Garcia and Errol Spence isn't coming off in December, because now they've decided that is pay-per-view. And sometimes PBC has come to their senses like this a lot of times because they haven't been going with pay-per-view. Why not make that the first Fox fight? I mean, apparently the Fox contract is starting in December. Why not be bold and use some of the Fox money for those guys and make that the first Fox fight? But getting to the point of this one, the pay-per-views haven't delivered. The decline started when they started just giving you nothing on the undercard. That was taking advantages of the fans right there. All the promoters started doing it. And then the main events did get worse and worse. More went on pay-per-view that shouldn't have been. Now it's been dying out, but, we've got, Canelo and Golovkin, a fight we do want to see, but then, you're going to hit everybody up for $84.99. I think the first fight was $1.4 million, including pay-per-view video streaming. I like to try to predict these types of things. I've been going back and forth as this one was coming up. I'm thinking they're not going to hit that on this one. I don't think they do 1.4. I would say, maybe they hit $1 million. That'll probably be a good night for them.
Yeah.
And
my guess
I
would
don't
be between
think
800,000 and $1 million.
Yeah, I could see that too, but I'm thinking lower. The price is lower on this one in terms of buys. Not the price for the fans, but what they're going to get. I think they do worse than the first fight.
All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up for this week. We will be back. We may do a show after the fight. What do you think, guys?
Well, we may be getting done awfully late, but we'll have to get something in as close to the fight as possible.
We'll see how late it is. You got nothing else to do Sunday morning, John, except watch your Giants get beat. And they don't play till Sunday night, and they're playing the Cowboys, so they'll get the win. So never mind.
And I can see they look bad, but the Cowboys look bad too. So
hey, my Bengals won. Jeremiah's Broncos won. So that means me and Jeremiah's Golovkin's going to win, and your Canelo will go down like your Giants. like Stormy Daniels to the president. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap the show up for tonight. On Friday, around noon, 1 o'clock Eastern Time on Survive and Advance with me and Steve Risley, we will have special guest John Raspani on, who wrote Intimate Warfare, to talk a little bit about the book and to talk about the pay-per-view fight Saturday night, so make sure you check that out. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, Spotify, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. Wherever you find sports podcasts, you'll find The Grueling Truth. So for John Einreinhofer, Jeremiah Preisser, I'm Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to The Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.